The world's coldest city, minus 48 degrees Celsius, that's 55 degrees Fahrenheit. This is what greets the locals of Yakutsk every morning, and this has been going on for 272 days. So why is it so freezing? Why doesn't it get warmer? And how do the locals put up with such frigid temperatures? If you are enjoying this video, please like and subscribe. Well, there are 3 reasons. First is its location. Second is global warming. And third is Russian architecture. Let me explain. Yakutsk is located in eastern Siberia, halfway between the Arctic Circle and the equator. During summer, it can get pretty warm, but during winter, it's a different story altogether. A polar vortex forms over the Arctic Circle. It's a giant spinning mass of super cold air, and when it's strong, it keeps the cold air in the Arctic where it belongs. But sometimes it weakens, and the cold air escapes into the lower latitudes, and Yakutsk is right in its path. It's like getting caught in the crossfire of an angry herd of woolly mammoths. But wait, didn't you say that global warming was making the planet warmer? Isn't global warming supposed to bring more heat to Yakutsk? It should, but instead of getting warmer, Yakutsk is getting colder, which is why it made headlines last year when it hit minus 53 degrees Celsius or 63 degrees Fahrenheit. Not only was this the coldest temperature recorded in Yakutsk since 1994, but it was also the hottest temperature ever recorded in the history of Earth. That's right, hottest ever recorded. How does that make any sense? Is it possible that global warming could be causing extreme weather events to happen more frequently, pushing the planet towards its tipping point? Are we doomed to suffer through never-ending heat waves and deadly storms? Will rising sea levels swallow our coastal cities? Well, not exactly. The thing is, the average global temperature refers to the average of all the temperatures measured across the planet. If you have one really hot day followed by one really cold day, then the average of those 2 days would be lukewarm, which in this case would be about 1 degree Celsius or 34 degrees Fahrenheit. But if you add another really hot day and another really cold day, then the average would still be lukewarm. However, the sum total of all those really hot and really cold days would be much larger. So, even though the average temperature might not change much, the range of temperatures will become larger, meaning that we'll experience more extreme weather events. In other words, global warming doesn't mean a gradual increase in temperature across the board. It means an increase in the range of temperatures, which means we'll continue to experience regular freezing cold snaps in Yakutsk, except they'll be colder than ever before, which brings us back to the present day. Last week, a polar vortex formed over Siberia, a giant spinning mass of cold air, so cold that it broke records. The polar vortex was so strong, in fact, that it created a secondary vortex, which carried the cold air southwards, covering an area larger than the United States and bringing temperatures down by 50 degrees Celsius. And Yakutsk was right in its path. It was the perfect storm of circumstances that resulted in the world's coldest city becoming even colder than usual. But the way the locals deal with such temperatures is genius. Most of the buildings in Yakutsk were built over permanent ice layers that sit 200 meters or 660 feet below the surface. The only way to build on permafrost is to elevate the building on piles that are either driven or drilled deep into the ground. You see, when you build a structure on top of permafrost, the sun's rays hit the roof first, then conduct the heat to the inside of the building. So it makes no sense to insulate the walls because the heat will come in through the roof. But it makes sense to insulate the roof because the heat will come out through the roof. So the buildings in Yakutsk are designed to look like upside-down ice cream cones. They're hollow cylinders with their tips buried deep into the permafrost. The roofs are slightly slanted so that the snow slides off and doesn't pile up. And thanks to the permanent ice layer below, the foundation doesn't move. Otherwise, the buildings might tilt or crack. Okay, let's take a closer look at what goes on underneath Yakutsk. Now, it's not just houses that have to be built over permanent ice. Everything does. Roads, railways, airports, gas lines, water pipes, even sewers. If you don't build these structures above the ice layer, then they'll get crushed under the weight of their own contents, or they'll crack when the ground thaws. Or even worse, they'll sink into the muddy slush below. Now, the solution to this problem is a type of foundation called a pile. There are two ways to construct a pile. You can drive a steel pole into the ground until it reaches the permanent ice layer. Or you can drill a hole through the top layers of soil and rock and then fill it with concrete. The most common type of pile used in Yakutsk is called a board pile. It consists of a vertical column of concrete filled inside a hole drilled into the ground. The advantage of a board pile is that you can build them anywhere, but the disadvantage is that they require specialized equipment to install, namely a drilling rig. In Yakutsk, they use something called a continuous flight auger. It looks like a corkscrew with wings. You turn it and push it into the ground. The auger drills a hole behind it and pushes the soil ahead of it. Then they pull it back up and fill the hole with concrete. Once the concrete is dried, they repeat the process until they reach the permanent ice layer. To make sure that the piles don't move, they connect them to each other with a network of beams, planks, and metal rods. This is what the ground underneath Yakutsk looks like. Of course, building on piles is nothing new. The ancient Egyptians used them to build their pyramids. The Romans used them to build their aqueducts, and modern engineers use them to build modern skyscrapers. But not all piles are created equal. In Jakarta, Indonesia, engineers had to design piles that could withstand earthquakes and soil liquefaction. In Venice, Italy, engineers had to design piles that could support the weight of St. Mark's Basilica without damaging the fragile ecosystem of the Venetian lagoon. And in Yakutsk, engineers had to design piles that could support the weight of a city while staying firmly planted on top of permanent ice. To do this, they invented a special type of pile called a gravel pad pile. It consists of a layer of gravel placed on top of the permafrost, then covered with concrete. The gravel acts as a buffer between the concrete and the ice, allowing the concrete to expand and contract without cracking. Without the gravel pad, the piles would crack under the weight of their own contents. With the gravel pad, they could distribute the weight evenly across the permafrost. Now, you may be wondering why they didn't just build the city on top of the gravel pad. Well, that wouldn't work either. The gravel pad is only good for light loads like roads and railways, but anything heavier, like a house or a school, needs a pile foundation. Otherwise, the structure might sink into the gravel pad. Then if that happens, the structure will tilt and eventually collapse. So you can see why building in Yakutsk is such a challenge. But the locals have done an amazing job. Despite the harsh environment, they managed to create a city that looks like any other city, except this one has upside-down buildings. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.